Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the missing link in the digital health strategy, connecting European and member states' medicine agencies. My name's Laura Shields, and I will be your moderator for the next 90 minutes. As I'm sure you can gather from the title, the objective for today's session, which has been organised by Medicines for Europe, is to look at the digitalisation of pharmaceutical regulatory systems across Europe as building blocks for digital health and greater interconnectedness, as well as how to invest in the infrastructure needed to support it. Now, the argument goes that greater digitalisation will enable faster answers to everyday tasks, as well as how to deal with critical situations such as shortages of medicines, like some of those seen during the COVID-19 crisis, but also as and when problems arise in the future that are similar or related to other emergencies beyond pandemics. And of course, the pressing urgency for today's webinar is the legislative context. So there's several pieces of legislation that touch on this issue that are currently undergoing at the moment. So there is, of course, a digital strategy. There's also the Union Health Package with the EC proposal and the extension of the EMA's mandate. And of course, there is the Pharmaceutical Strategy and the EU for Health. So there's an awful lot of political context in which we are discussing the issues today. Now, just a quick bit of housekeeping about how today is going to work. We have two political speakers coming up first. So somebody from the European Parliament and from the European Commission. And then we will also be doing a panel where we'll get really into the meat of the issues with industry and also with the regulatory side of things. So we have a great set of speakers coming up for you this afternoon, and there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end. However, please do post your questions as they come to you, and we will take some of them if they're appropriate and they are relevant for the discussion as and when each speaker finishes. So please do post your questions via the Q&A button, not the chat. That's very important. Please put them in the Q&A and tell us who your question is for, and please keep it short and focused. So that's very much the context for today's session, and I hope you enjoy it and we have a very good and interactive discussion. I would now like to introduce our first speaker. We are joined by Elisabetta Kovacci from the European Parliament. She is standing in today for the MEP Christian Silviu Buosi, who unfortunately couldn't be with us this afternoon. And actually also we have a substitute from the European Commission as well. But Elisabetta Kovacci works very closely with MEP Buosi, and he is of course the chair of the Industry Committee in the European Parliament. And so Elisabetta, we're very pleased to welcome you. And if you'd like to switch on your camera, the floor is yours.
Hello, and thank you very much, Laura. I would like to salute everyone here today. I don't know if you see me. I think you see me now as well, yes. Unfortunately, Mr. Buosi is not able to be with us today, and I took his place, speaking on his behalf today, sharing with you some of his work and some of his views as regards to the future of health and to the future of the pharma legislation. I will start already in the subject. The health sector is more and more challenging, hence the sustainability of the healthcare sector is more and more challenged these days. The need of health systems turning digital, the lack of investments in health, issues related to the availability, accessibility, and affordability of medicines, as well as manufacturing dependencies on third countries outside of the EU are a few examples of these circumstances. Moreover, we have the COVID-19 pandemic that has revealed many inefficiencies in our healthcare system and deepened the existing challenges in the field of shortages. It was very clear that the sustainability of our health systems in the EU, and particularly the financial sustainability, is an increasing challenge for all member states. Moreover, this pandemic has highlighted also the need for increased use of digital tools, especially those aimed at decreasing the spread of of the pandemic and help in the medical facilities. Even though digital health and digitalizing healthcare has proven to contribute at addressing the challenges in the healthcare sector and has a great potential in making our systems more resilient, we are far from reaching its full potential. The success of the digital transformation in health and its enormous beneficial impact on patients will depend on how much we plan for the next 5 years from today. This is why we need a multi-sectoral approach to health, synergies among different funding schemes and instruments, synergies of different services and sectors, but also an outcome-based approach. Even before the coronavirus outbreak, the European Parliament has been always firmly committed in stressing the key value of the digital transformation for health. And in line with the priority Europe Fit for Digital Age of the European Commission, we recognize the central role that digitalization could play for health and patients in several occasions. Now it is crystal clear. The healthcare system needs a transformation that guarantees patients access to health services, as well as the optimization of health services. Digitalization should accompany this transformation. The COVID-19 crisis has exacerbated the extreme needs that Europe has to progress rapidly into digitalization, especially in health. Introducing digitalization in the healthcare systems and at the level of regulatory authorities would tremendously make the difference in first empowering the patients in managing their diseases, secondly in improving efficiency of the healthcare systems, and last but not least, enabling authorities, European and national ones, to fast react in critical situations such as shortages of medicines or shortages of vaccines. The European Parliament has recommended to the European Commission via several acts to be ambitious and forward-looking. Among those, Mr. Bușoi would like to mention both the motion for resolution on enabling the digital transformation of health and care in digital single market, as well as the own initiative report to address the emerging problem of shortages of medicines that was adopted last year in the Parliament. And last but not least, the recent EU for Health program that Mr. Bușoi was the rapporteur and the responsible of the EP. As a direct consequence of COVID-19, the EU proposed its standalone program, as mentioned before, the EU for Health program, aimed at strengthening the EU health systems and the healthcare workforce, including by digital transformation and by increased use of digital solutions in the field of health. There is clearly a need that a significant amount of the funding under the EU for Health is going to member states, which have been severely affected by the crisis and should be focused on the reform of health systems, with digital health being a priority. But it is not the only instrument that will support the digital transformation of national healthcare systems. Mr. Bușoi would like to remind that this program will work in synergies with Digital Europe and with the Recovery and Resilience Facility that will support reforms in member states toward turning digital in all fields and including in the health sector. As regards to the use of digital tools, on one hand, the crisis has underlined the need to progress digital tools. In order to really put the patient at the center of health systems, in order to make the systems more efficient, we need the widest possible use of new technologies, such as electronic health file, as proposed in the EU for Health, the electronic prescription, electronic leaflet, and some telemedicine systems. We need to increasingly integrate the use of artificial intelligence in health systems and support innovation in the medical sector. Particularly tools like the electronic product information, the e-leaflet, that is very dear to Mr. Bușoi, which will accompany the paper version, could empower patients to benefit with the most up-to-date information on their medicines and everywhere needed in their language. At the same time, it could facilitate the moving of medicines within the single market during critical and emergency situations, like it was proven in the current pandemic. On the other hand, as regards to the regulatory system, COVID-19 crisis showed that a robust digital infrastructure building on existing tools would interconnect EU and the national authorities, enabling them to better manage of critical situations such as shortages of medicines and to dramatically increase regulatory efficiency, enabling medicines agencies to focus their resources on patient and critical tasks rather than administration. For this reason, the European Parliament has recognized that the fit-for-purpose regulatory environment is a key element to protect public health and provide access to high-quality medicines. We are of the opinion that effective use of IT systems will improve regulatory efficiency across Europe. Therefore, we urged the Commission a couple of times to optimize the European regulatory framework by harmonizing regulatory existing projects with a focus on data quality, interoperability, and the interdependency of the EU regulatory framework. The pharmaceutical strategy that we have on the table right now and will happen in the next years includes some of the recommendation and is setting the basis for a bold patient-centric digital transformation. For example, Romania has had a lot of medicines withdrawals over the years, leading to lower access to medicines. By improving regulatory efficiency, it will be easier to maintain less expensive but still medically important medicines. As regards the EU for health opportunities, you all know that in December, on the 14th of December, we concluded the EU for health negotiations after three dialogues and many technical meetings under the German presidency. We did it in less than 4 months, and we have had a tight schedule, but we were determined to end it so the program could start retroactively from the 1st of January this year, together with the most of the MFF files. The main priorities that we kept and fought for in trialogues and also represent the core of the program are as explicit as possible. EU must invest more in strengthening healthcare system by investing more in health promotion and disease prevention, support for digitalization of healthcare, health inequalities that must be reduced, and better preparedness and response in crisis, better coordination between member states. Having in mind the health of our citizens, by the promotion of health and a person-centered approach, the EU for Health program will deliver not only on short-term crisis management, but also on long-term objectives in ensuring the development of strong and resilient health systems in the member states, and should address long-term challenges such as cancer, the burden of chronic diseases, mental health and aging, vaccine hesitancy, and equal access during medicine shortages. The program will support actions to enhance the availability, accessibility, and affordability of medicinal products and medical devices, as well as crisis-relevant products, by encouraging sustainable production and supply chains, as well as innovation in the EU. The EU for Health will be able to complement member states' efforts and national programs, and in synergy with the other instruments as described previously, will deliver on improving the well-being of our citizens by addressing health inequalities, by strengthening the healthcare system, by supporting digitalization of health. Among the key priorities of the European Parliament team had always in mind to support action in digitalizing the healthcare, in particular through the creation and application of European e-health records, and support for the creation and use of the future European Health Data Space Platform. In this context, we also achieved including the support for action and interoperable IT tools to monitor, prevent, manage, report, and notify shortages of medicinal products and medical devices while contributing to their affordability as well. Not all medicines agencies have available funding to investing in digitalization. By providing EU funding for this project, all agencies across EU will be able to invest in digitalization at the same time. This for sure will include equity between countries and efficiency for the EU, because data will be available from all countries. For Romania, this digitalization will be especially important because it in the past suffered from shortages for different reasons. With more digital information about medicines, Romania should be able to monitor the situation and take more preventive action on shortages as well as many other member states. This would be better than trying to mitigate on ongoing shortages for sure. With this being said, I conclude the intervention on behalf of Mr. Bușoi. I will be here taking notes from everyone, and if you would have questions that you would like to pose Mr. Bușoi, I am very happy to take them and to address them to Mr. Bușoi at a later stage, and then maybe have also interactive discussions with the ones that would like to pose him questions. And thank you very much for inviting us, and good luck with the conference today.
Thank you very much, Elisabetta. And don't forget, if you're in the audience and you want to pose your questions, please do put them in, start them coming in now via the Q&A button, and we will do our best to get them to Elisabetta, but also to our other speakers as well. So that's the view from the side of the European Parliament, and we're now going to switch to the view from the European Commission. And we are joined by Sara Rafael Almeida, who is a policy officer at DG Sante, working in the unit for medicines policy authorization and monitoring, and she is kindly standing in for Olga Solomon, who's the head of unit, who unfortunately for personal reasons wasn't able to join at the last minute. So Sara, thanks very much for stepping in, and please, floor's yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you at this webinar organized by Medicines for Europe. As Laura just mentioned, I would like to apologize on behalf of Olga, who could not join you today, and I'm therefore replacing her. I'm working in her team, Santé, DG Santé, Unit B5. I will start now. On the 25th of November last year, the European Commission published a communication on the Pharmaceutical Strategy, 1 year after the von der Leyen Commission took office. I'm sure you are familiar with this communication. The Pharma Strategy covers the full cycle of a medicine, from scientific discovery, lab, animal testing, clinical trials, all the way to marketing authorization through HTA, pricing, reimbursement, access, including IP protection. So while DG Sante is the lead DG on this file and the pen holder of the communication, this work relies on a strong and wide collaboration with various policy areas, including research and innovation, industrial policy, competition, trade, environmental policies. So we are working closely with other DGs, with member states and other stakeholders, including industry associations, patient and healthcare professionals, representatives, and academia. And today, as I speak to you, we have entered in the implementation phase of this ambitious policy agenda. So the communication includes a number of actions, some legislative, others non-legislative, and as you might know, work in some areas which are more mature is already underway, and this includes the revision of the legislation on pediatric and rare diseases. So the implementation of the strategy will span the mandate of this commission, and will include a proposal for a targeted revision of the Pharma acquis in 2022. Now, as requested, I will now make some key considerations on the digital dimension of the Pharma strategy and refer some key actions of particular relevance for Medicines for Europe and for the audience today. And I also take the opportunity to already recognize the alignment between what I'm about to say and what we just heard from Elisabetta Kovacci, representing MEP Bushoi from the Parliament. So digital transformation is already affecting the whole life cycle of medicines, from research to authorization and post-marketing. I mean, if we look at developments in AI, big data, real-world evidence, the rising in developments of complex combination products with the drug software device component. I mean, we look at all these developments, and if we properly integrate them in our authorization system, they really have the potential to lead to faster and more accessible treatments. I mean, we know that modeling and artificial intelligence already allow faster screening of molecules. It can help also accelerate the identification of potential active substances and reduce the high attrition rates in drug development. In addition, I mean, developments in genomics also need to be taken into account in terms of access and efficiency. If we look at the situation now and the development of vaccines against COVID-19, relying on new techniques, including mRNA, it really shows that innovation can transform traditional development approaches and reduce the timelines. So ATMPs and personalized therapies are other examples of these developments. So in the context of the pharma strategy, we find ourselves in a situation today where we look at our pharma key, which was designed at the time when these technologies were far from being a reality. So indeed, we need to revisit our pharma key to avoid any bottlenecks or regulatory gaps and to encourage new breakthroughs happening first in the EU. So in order for this to happen, we, as mentioned already today, we must build the necessary infrastructure. We need to have that investment, and having at the time of the pharma strategy also another important flagship policy initiative of this Commission, that is the European Health Data Space, and other public-private partnership programs can really boost research, and particularly in the area of real-world data and the use of real-world evidence. These require that, our network, the European actors, also benefit from high-quality and reliable data that can be used in clinical trial design, in the assessment of medicines, pharmacovigilance. So without that, we will not be able to really implement this ambitious policy agenda as we should. So, as I mentioned, the European Health Data Space is included as an action under the Pharma strategy. So, the European Health Data Space aims to establish an interoperable data access infrastructure to improve exchange of data, federated access, and cross-border analysis of health data in the EU. In this context, and particularly for medicines, there is one project, it's called the Darwin Project. It's a network that will be an integral part of the European Health Data Space, and it's aimed at enabling access to real-world data, particularly from electronic healthcare records, to support decision-making, and we are working closely with our colleagues at the EMA on this file. Another important element of digital is electronic product information, which was also mentioned by the previous speaker. And you will find that EPI is another action under the Pharma strategy. So the objective really is to make it happen, to develop this standard, this tool, and to facilitate the delivery of information to healthcare professionals and patients in our multilingual environment, and indeed to support a wider availability of medicine. So there is an ongoing work at the EMA and the HMA Better Use of Medicines group, and we are actively involved in this work as well. Another element extremely important for, concerning regulatory efficiency is variations. I mean, we see that there's a need for simplification, streamlining procedures, and cost reductions. And in the context of the Pharma strategy, we will carry out a study to inform this evaluation of the regulatory framework, including variations. So we understand also with the experience of the current legislation that these developments might be challenging our regulatory system, but there's definitely a need to increase capacity, to increase skills, and also for the right data governance and infrastructure. So I think we find ourselves in a moment where it's quite exciting policy time for health. Despite COVID, this was the ambition to really boost our data capabilities and to have a more robust regulatory system. And in that regard, we have never been more resourceful. So this is it's also good to highlight. I move on to the difficult and really problematic topic of shortages. So the key objective, the main objective of the Pharma strategy is to ensure that medicines are available to patients in need at all times, in times of crisis and in times of normal. And as mentioned by our previous speaker, COVID-19 has accentuated the issue of shortages across the EU. And before I go into the details, more detail reflection on what we are doing in this regard, I would just, on behalf of the team working on shortages, I would like to take the opportunity to acknowledge Medicines for Europe's valuable collaboration on shortages management during the COVID pandemic. I was told that with the input from the industry single points of contact and the member states single points of contact, the EMA coordinated the monitoring of shortages, which facilitated the early identification of issues and associated mitigation measures. Now, with the new health package and the enhanced role of the EMA, there's an opportunity here to provide support to build on that work that was done, that is being done under COVID-19, and indeed to establish an IT system that can monitor shortages in a more intuitive and efficient way. So interoperability with existing systems will be key in the development of that system. We are, in this context, you might be aware of this, we are conducting a study on looking at the root causes of shortages, how to address it, and this study is currently being conducted, and we expect to be finalizing it in Q3 of this year. I will not go into details on what the study will aim to address. Another, just to add on shortages, that we will also assess the requirement for continuous supply of marketing for marketing authorization holders and distributors and the obligations on pharmaceutical manufacturers to submit notifications of supply disruption provided as required by the EU legislation. So just to close the topic of shortages, we will consider possible legislative and non-legislative measures to use this to inform the actions identified under the Pharma strategy. To conclude, just a short mention to mechanisms of support to member states and NCAs in their much needed digital transformation. So the pharma strategy and the European health data space cannot be implemented without the commitment from member states. And in order to have that commitment, we need to support them in dealing, with primary and secondary use of data, health data, but also investments in data quality and digital infrastructure, as I previously mentioned. And now, with the EU for Health, we have a generous budget of 5 billion. The multi-annual financial framework includes other funding instruments, and also the recovery and resilience facility, offer a number of opportunities for member states to support their infrastructure needs, training needs, and also the enhanced role of DMA can be very helpful to increase, collaboration in this field. So I will stop now. I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Zara. We actually have a question for you, if that's okay. Somebody writes, the EPs pointed out that we're far from reaching the potential of digitalisation, which is something that you've already mentioned as well, and that the speed varies from country to country for the digitalisation of the regulatory network. Is the Commission thinking about some instruments to align all member states?
So this is always a consideration that we need to have whenever we put forward a vision. And I give you the example of electronic product information. The legislation mandates a paper leaflet, but we live today in an age where, it's also almost unbelievable that we don't have API, right? So at the same time, we do not have a system in the EU where member states have the same level of digitalization. So we need to be very careful in terms of how far we push for something, because we cannot let patients and healthcare professionals behind. So while we are developing EPI, it's not like we can ditch the paper just like that. So this is something that we have very much in mind. And by developing EPI in the context of the working group that we have with HMA and the EMA, we're working with member states that are at different levels of digital, and that together we will be able to build something that can serve everyone. And of course, the uptake, then we will have to see if all countries will be able to start immediately or not. But by working together, developing the tools together in an harmonized approach, I think this is the only way to not allow other countries to be left behind. And once EPI is developed and fully functioning, we will look at that next phase of making it a reality in member states.
Thank you. Thank you. And actually, I know I said it was just one question, but we have a very, very quick follow-up just to build on what you've been talking about. So another question from the audience, would the Commission support pilot projects to introduce an e-leaflet in Europe? Would you support pilot projects?
It's already happening yes. So we have, as I mentioned earlier, a group of NCAs that is working with the EMA in developing EPI. So we are looking at all the technical needs in terms of standards and tools to really make EPI a reality. So this is something underway. And as I mentioned, once this is developed, and we will enter that phase of actual implementation and testing in member states. And I think once we reach that moment, we will have to understand what are the resources and how fast we can go in terms of implementing it throughout the EU. So very much in our thoughts and in our considerations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And Sarah is going to be staying with us for the rest of the webinar, and there will be the chance to put more questions to her later. So do send them in and we will collect them, and we will put the best ones in as and when the audience Q&A section comes. So that's the sort of political context, political policy view that we've just heard there. And we're now going to move to the broader panel. And if we could just see our speaker slide up on the screen, I will talk you through who we have in speaking order. So I'm very pleased if this panel would all like to switch on their cameras briefly, just so that I can introduce you all. So in speaking order, we're joined by Markus Sieger, who is the CEO of Pharma, and he's a delegate for digital health in Medicines for Europe's executive committee. From the regulatory side of things, we have Christa Wertemer-Hoche, who is the head of Austrian Medicines and Medical Devices Agency, and she's also the chair of the EMA Management Board. Tony Caudry joins us. He's the Vice President for European Strategic Operations at Accord Healthcare. Caroline Kleinjan is the European head of the Regulatory Competence Centre at Sandoz, and she's also the chair and of the Regulatory and Scientific Affairs Committee at Medicines for Europe. And then last but not least, we're also joined by Ahmed Toki, who is the EMEA lead for global regulatory policy at MSD. So these are our speakers. That's the order in which they're coming. And Markus, I'm going to start with you, if I may. Quick question for you. So obviously what we've heard is both the digital health strategy and the pharmaceutical strategy look at making Europe fit for the digital age. How does Medicines for Europe see the issue? What's their vision?
Thank you, Laura. We see many positive actions on the EU agenda. If you could please switch to the next slide. Thank you. Especially in these three pillars, the European digital strategy, the digital single market strategy, and the pharmaceutical strategy. Whereas we see really that, the European digital strategy sets the framework in making really technology work for people, to make them accessible and create a competitive digital economy, and really makes it sustainable to all of us. Then in a second stage of the single market strategy, we see that health data really is a key component, also allowing personalized medicine through infrastructure and to empower citizens to prevent and stimulate this interaction between the providers and the patient. And at the end of the day, the new pharmaceutical strategy, which really states to be or to have a strong ecosystem at important crossroads, and to make really to the patient all those medical needs which are unmet right now accessible, but also makes us competitive and innovative in Europe as a pharma industry. And having all that seen, I think it's very promising, especially under the context of making European fit for the digital age. Now, if I may switch to the next slide. But we still think from a Medicines for Europe standpoint that we need more to keep really the healthcare system successful. And I think it's, many people talk about the future, but I think we are here today supplying medicines to many people in Europe. And we see that there's a lot of dispersed data around in many healthcare systems. And we don't really have the same digital state as my predecessor just said in those countries. And I think it's important to understand that some of these systems have to be upgraded very quickly and connected to really help, as we have seen also during the pandemic, to that authorities and all the stakeholders can make the right decisions in a timely manner. So this actually calls for a new digital regulatory infrastructure to start with, to really drive the system today in a successful way. If I may have the next slide, please. And I think what we learned, and this is just an overview, the next speaker will then dive deeper into it. I think we saw that we don't have usable data, and we didn't have also equitable access to this data. And therefore, we had at the end of the day shortages in different countries, and this really created an extremely uncoordinated approach, especially in the beginning, on how medicines were distributed and accessed. So we think we really need a very strong cooperation between the industry and governments to fix this quickly and to improve our ability to manage health crisis in Europe. Therefore, this interconnected digital medicines regulatory system is obviously a very important platform to install.
Where do you think the EU institutions should put their focus?
Thank you for the question. If we move to the next slide, we think it's that the focus should be really on collaboration. We have seen this during the pandemic, where we were really very welcomed when we made our contribution in terms of managing the shortages and giving or building up clarity through our data sources where a medication was, and planning forward for critical medicines. And we think it needs a very strong partnership with different stakeholders, so we can really build up and support patients and create an added value also for the payers. Now, we see 4 areas of focus. Please, the next slide. And they are interoperability and interconnection across all data sources, which we have in the European Union. The digitalization of the medicines agency systems, information to the patient, and the resilience of the supply chain, which we have seen is an absolute necessity. Now, we are very excited about the European for Health program, because it gives us, or we see funding opportunities that really can speed up the digitalization process, so that we can have very quickly those interoperable systems, which really will help us to have more resilient infrastructure. Next slide, please. Now, if I dive deeper into these 4 areas, on the interoperability, we really see that the member states should be really aligned in terms of where they are in terms of implementation of the digital healthcare systems. We really see that the database should become interoperable very quickly. And I think the EU Health Space is a very good instrument to do so. AI will actually drive patient care, and I think will also be important for research. Then on the other side, we also think that on the regulatory side, the interoperability and also the streamlining of processes will help us really to be also more competitive in Europe. On the supply chain side, we really need transparency, security, and visibility to really, especially on the critical medication. I think there we need to understand stock levels and so forth. Then I think we need a stronger digitization of all the supply chain blocks, and we also need, as we see it as an industry, also a strengthening of the industrial, platforms we have in Europe through means on Industry 4.0, but through general support also of our industrial capabilities. Next slide, please. When we talk about the digitalization of the medicines agency systems, we think that there should really be an automatic exchange. There should be an optimization of the regulatory processes, and we should have an accelerated digital telematics infrastructure. And I think this could really help to be more resilient. And then at the end, e-information of the patients, the electronic product information. In today's world, as was said before, it's actually interesting that this is not available because it's so straightforward and it has so big value for the consumer that we really have to push this as a priority. And I think also there should be additional information available to the patients, like disease information. And then at the end, for sure, also the control access to his own health data for prevention and compliance. That will be the 4 areas we see as the focus areas right now in this process.
Thank you very much, Marcus. And just for those of you in the audience, just remember, if you have questions for Marcus, please do put them in and we will gather them and we will ask the best ones at the end of the session if we have time. So thank you very much, Marcus. And we're now going to switch and take a look now at the regulatory perspective on this. And I'm very pleased that we're joined by Christa Wirtemer-Hoche, who is obviously wearing 2 hats because she's the head of the Austrian Medicines and Medical Devices Agency, but she's also the head of the EMA Management Board as well. So Christa, if you'd like to stick your microphone on and your camera when you're ready, I would very much like to talk to you a little bit about some of the challenges that we've heard so far. So some of it has been to do with funding, digital infrastructure, the different sort of challenges of when it comes to connectivity across Europe. And my first question is, how do you think the EU institutions can better support the regulatory agencies in the move towards digitalisation? And it'd be great to hear the national perspective as well as the EMA one.
Yes, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting webinar. Unfortunately, it is not possible for me to stay until the end of the webinar, but I'm happy now to give the point of view of a national competent authority. And I was very carefully listening to the presentations until now, and many points have been raised, and I would like to touch the one or the other. Let me start with digitalization. I also want to mention that next to all these strategies which have been mentioned until now, we also have the so-called joint EMA-HMA network strategy 2021 to 2025. And of course, we are putting focus on issues raised, for example, on the digitalization. And the strategic tools for the digital transformation are mainly 4 goals, starting with the enabling the access to and the analysis of routine healthcare data, to promote standardization of targeted data, and to build also sustainable capability and capacity within the network, including statistics, real-world data, and advanced analytics. And of course, we have to promote dynamic regulation and policy learning within the current regulatory framework. So especially what was mentioned, the artificial intelligence and big data, it also was mentioned the Darwin Project, where all the member states are involved, and it's a big joint activity of the HMA and EMA. I think one of the most important things is that we have to have trust in the technologies are needed. Yeah, and these trends have to be integrated in all the agencies, and we'll later come on to the question whether we are all the same speed in implementing it. And I also want to repeat the word training, because this is something which is absolutely essential, especially also on the side of the national competent authorities, that we have to train our staff members, we have to inform them, and they have to get used to work with it. But this goes hand in hand also with data packages we are receiving from the industry. And of course, we have to have a very open and transparent communication between each other. Otherwise, it won't be possible to really implement it. And we have to make a so-called impact assessment. What does it mean? What does it mean for regulators? What does it mean for marketing authorization holders? And we have to analyze which business processes have to be changed and so on. And I think this goes hand in hand also the change of the business processes. As Sarah mentioned, the variations that of course we have to improve our regulatory system, that there is a study ongoing, and that perhaps there will be changes necessary in the regulatory system. I even would say I'm sure that there are changes necessary in the regulatory process to adapt that all this can be implemented. And we have to have an open discussion about financing also in all these respects. Then I would like to mention also about the sustainability of the network and the operational excellence. Especially concerning operational excellence, yes, we have to get rid of the manual data manipulation. We have to follow that there is a data interoperability, as it also was mentioned by Marcus. And of course, we have to have an automatic data exchange. And as an example, I would like to mention the use of an electronic application form. That this electronic application form should serve as a data carrier, which can be used for automatic data importation. And I also want to mention that in Austria, we have already this kind of system. And this goes also hand in hand with the SPOR system, where we really have the basis then for automatic implementation. Of course, the data have also to be stored in a logical way. And concerning digital strategy, I think it is very, very important that we have a stable implementation roadmap. Yeah, and to trigger investments by industry and by NCAs. There has to be really a good roadmap where we have more clarity what will be implemented when.
Thank you very much, Christa. Okay, second question for you. How can we to make sure that this digitalization of regulatory operations happens harmoniously, so it happens all at the same time in order to avoid a two-speed Europe, which is something that is obviously a major concern in member states, as we've already been hearing?
Yeah, that's a very important question, a good question, and not easy to give an answer. Because yes, we are individual member states, and the status of digitalization at the national competent authorities is at a different stage. Yeah, we have to be clear on that. So therefore, as I said, we need really a good and clear implementation roadmap. Please remember when we had to implement the ECTD, we agreed on an implementation roadmap, and perhaps one or the other would say, oh God, ECTD, it took much longer than originally stated. Yes, but perhaps we can also have some lessons learned from this approach, and set up a more stable and robust implementation plan. But we have also to be realistic, and we will have a stepwise implementation due to the diversity and different technological status. And but it would be helpful, as I said, that when we have this roadmap, when all the partners have a common goal and an agreed timetable with agreed deadlines, and it also has to be clear that all costs money. We have to be clear who is financing it. And I'm very happy to hear from the European Parliament that they are thinking on a model for funding, that the EU has a model for funding these projects in order to facilitate that all countries will be adequate for the implementation of these projects. Please allow me another point, because it was raised nearly by all the speakers. This is the electronic product information. I think this is very important, yes, and there are several activities ongoing, but I think we also have to adapt very quick the legislation, because for the moment it is only possible to have both the paper version and the electronic version. It has to be a clear statement in the legislation that electronic product information only is possible. And I think now in the crisis, in the COVID-19 crisis, we have a very good example, because we have the first COVID-19 vaccines. And there we have several exemptions. We have first the exemption that an English leaflet is possible, that we all agreed for an English labeling. And we have, I think all the member states have published on their website the translation in the national language. And of course, the Commission with the marketing authorization has also published the translation on their website. So it is available in electronic format, in paper only the English one. So I think we also can learn from the crisis and take this as an example and have hopefully quite clear situation in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christa. We have an audience question for you now, if that's okay. Somebody asks, what is the impact of the current lack of proper digitalization on the regulatory network? So what is the effect that it's having now by not being fully digitalized? And then the follow-up to that is, if you had a magic power, what would be the first step that you would take, or the first wish that you would enact to progress the digitalization of the regulatory network? So what are we losing at the moment, and what's the first thing you would change?
First of all, I have to say that yes, the NCAs are quite far advanced already in digitalization, because also our current situation in the COVID-19 crisis has shown that most of the people are working from home, and it is possible. We have the big advantage that we are receiving now all the dossiers in electronic format. We have a repository, and and the people can do their assessment work from at home. Yeah. So this is really shows that we are really advanced. If I have the power to more or less facilitate it further, I would like to have for Europe a common repository where we really have all the dossiers there, that there is not the transformation from one end to the other, but I would like to have a European repository where all the dossiers are archived. On the second hand, I would like to have an internal repository where all the assessment reports are archived in order to avoid the sending of a lot of assessment reports and archiving them in each of the member states. So then further, yes, what else would I change? I would more or less encourage to finalize the SPORE system, where we really have the information on substance, product, organizations and referentials of all the medicinal products available in Europe. Because I think with such a system, we also can put in information about the availability. And this would also make more transparency on the availability situation of medicinal products. So this would also serve as a central data system for the availability of medicinal products.
Thank you very much, Krista. And we actually have one final question for you.
Perhaps allow me also to add something which was also mentioned, the good cooperation with Medicines of Europe and the good cooperation in principle with industry in order that the demand is fulfilled. I think that to calculate the demand is still an obligation for the industry. But this crisis situation has shown that we really have to improve our communication about the demand and supply in order to really avoid the situation of having a shortage for one particular substance, which is of urgent need in this situation.
Thank you very much. Final quick question from the audience, which is kind of a do you agree question. Somebody asks, why don't we move from application forms to European shared product files in a common system that both industry and regulators can collaborate on? Do you think we should do that?
Yes.
Okay, there you go. Easy answer. Okay, so just thank you very much, Krista. So just to summarize, one of the main things, the key point that I take from what Krista said is that to avoid two-speed Europe on this, it's essential to have a common goal, and also that the funding is so important that both the EC and the European Parliament did point out that there is going to be plenty of recovery fund money to help out with this, as well as the EU for Health programs. So this is putting some of the flesh on the bones. Krista, thank you very much for joining us. I know we're going to lose you now, but it was really good to have you here, and thank you very much for being so concrete about it all. Thanks very much. And we're now going to move back to the industry view now, and we're joined by Tony Caudry, who is the Vice President of European Strategic Operations at Accord Healthcare. And Tony, I'm going to start by asking you, if I may, did digital tools help companies actually manage during earlier waves of COVID, and whether or not you think they can actually be used in the future?
Good question. So good afternoon, everybody. Let me just go through my slides, and I hope to be able to give some enlightenment to that question. Part of my question is, were we lucky or were we ready? And I just sort of brought out at the very beginning, because it's very easy to look backwards, but I wanted to go, when we were right in the, I wouldn't say at the middle of it, because it was right at the beginning of this whole pandemic, there was no real clarity of what the treatment protocols were. So what did we have to manufacture? We were still trying to understand what was the demand in the marketplace. I mean, at one point there was over 2,500 clinical trials, and our own company also embarked on a number of different clinical trial pathways. Didn't come to any particular end, but it was very difficult to know where to start. We started with what seemed to be a single variant. I think many of us now know today that certainly in the UK, amongst many other variants that are coming out, the current UK one is now 70% more transmissible than the one that we started with. So had the COVID virus had been so much more transmissible, it would have been tougher. It would have been much tougher. there was no diagnostic tests, so we didn't know, there was no information around the scale of what we were trying to achieve. And I guess, from working very closely with the Medicines for Europe and industry, we worked very closely to try and understand what was actually going in by country, talking to all of the manufacturers. And not only that, we also worked very closely with the Indian Pharmaceutical Association to find out what was going on there. We talked to many of the logistics partners to understand what was going on in China. We buy a lot of APIs and raw materials out of China as well. So really trying to understand what was going on was very difficult. Our only data was historical sales. So that, what volume do we need to, what additional capacity did we need was a challenge for us. And we saw that within our supply chain, so very quickly that our logistics collapsed, both in air and sea. Particularly in air was a significant impact to our business. We saw that in some of the manufacturing plants, and first of all, we heard in Italy was the first place that over 20% of the workforce was impacted. Actually, in India, it was even a much greater number of the workforce was impacted in India. So this was another challenge at that time, not understanding what was going on. I think we may have all heard of stories or heard times that countries were making unilateral interventions, APIs or critical APIs that we were trying to get to be able to manufacture, was countries were making decisions about non-supply of those medicines, which didn't help the situation. We had situations where some countries were buying their own API and then coming to manufacturers and saying, could you manufacture this for us? Which also provided another set of challenges. And then as continue as this pandemic rolled out, it wasn't global in the beginning. So in the early days, we were able to service the European markets. And then we started getting questions about, can we start diverting volumes to Brazil? Because Brazil was seeing incredible volumes of incredible demand out in Brazil. So I think the way that the COVID actually rolled across Europe played quite an important part in terms of how we reacted. And I think there is an element in there in terms of digitalization, of really understanding around actually how is demand changing in our markets. Because as I'll tell you, as we talk a bit longer further on, it takes time for industry to react. So what did we do? I'm incredibly proud from what the industry did. Medicine for Europe agreed with the European Commission that the first time, as far as I'm aware, that the industry was allowed to collaborate together, albeit through a third party, and we used A.T. Kearney Consultancy as a clean room to bring together independent data from all of the suppliers around the 4 key ICU medicines. So that was a great opportunity for us, of really industry for the first time talking together to say, how are we all going to try and solve this problem? And that was I feel very proud about how the industry got together and what we did with the MFE. However, once we knew what the supply was, what was the demand? We were still trying to work out what was the demand. Countries were still struggling with themselves in terms of what was the demand. We couldn't really see what was happening. What we did, worked with our company and worked with the Medicines for Europe. We built an epidemiology model that sort of calculated the rate of usage of ICU medicines. And we were able to do that because we were able to see how it unfolded across the different countries in Italy, Spain, France. You could see the growth patterns. So we built a demand model, and we compared that demand model against the supply chain model to try and understand where are we going to have shortages and what are we going to do about it. And that was incredibly helpful to try and understand where were the big gaps that were going to happen in that. And fortuitously, we were able to manage that so that we were able to meet that demand. But in those early days, there was huge difficulty in getting any data available to understand what were we trying to deliver. Next slide, please. So we talk about digital, and we talk about the integrated digital systems and information flow. I just wanted to put on the table here about the fact why digital is so important. It's a balance between demand and supply. We have the customer, whatever you want to call that, be it a country or a patient or whatever else, but that customer. And we have a supplier, which is based on a certain amount of capacity and infrastructure, resources and materials that we have. And most times in a normal environment, that is well balanced. The challenge is the difference between the time it takes to get from a supplier to actually get it to the customer can take sometimes up to nearly 12 months to be able to provide medicines. And that's because it takes the time from getting from the API through manufacturing, through packaging, get it to logistics, and then get it out through distribution and to pharmacy. It's a very long time between demand signal and supply. And the sooner that we can get that demand signal, the better that the industry can actually work on finding solutions to be able to meet that demand. So that's in a normal status quo, that's fine. In the generic marketplace, actually, that supply chain is made up of many, many different companies. There's no single company. There are many different companies that are all supplying. Our demand comes across many, many different countries. And not only do they come from many different companies, within that total supply chains, there are hundreds of thousands of different types of product that we're having to balance between supply and demand. And we do that in a business as usual process that happens today. There are shortages. We know there are shortages in the marketplace, and we're working on that as the business as normal, as usual environment. In the pandemic, what happened was the X factor. We saw peak demand of some of our volumes going up nearly 3 to 4 times more demand than we've ever seen before. And that creates a huge strain on the industry upstream to find 4 times more capacity, 4 times more resource, 4 times more materials. So that piece around actually getting a better information from the marketplace is absolutely critical for the industry to be able to react in future, because the lead times are so long. If it takes a long time to understand what the demand is, it's going to be very difficult for the suppliers to be able to deliver that. So I do see that digitalization and collecting information is really going to help us to try and react faster to any pandemics in the future. Next slide, please. And I talk about speed, and I think this is where digital helps. It was the first that we all saw of this, but it started in January. Then February, by March, we were almost starting to get into lockdown. When it came to the ISPOC reporting, which really only kicked off on the 10th of April. And by the 17th of April, it was operational. And we were still learning how to use that tool. The tool was very rough. It was a rough indicator. I don't know how that tool was used, but there was no quantum in there. It just said, were you in or out of stock? Where in fact, you need some idea of the quantum. If you're a major supplier and you're out of stock, that has a much bigger impact than somebody else. And I think so a lot of that has been fed back, and we're looking to the next wave, the next reporting tool will have better measures in there than the first time that we had it. So it's very difficult in the early days. It was very unidirectional. It was all about just suppliers actually delivering the data into the ISPOC tool. The problem with that is that the shortage reporting in countries, we have a disconnect between what was being reported at the European level and the national level, because it very much depends who do you ask and when do you ask, and how you ask it to get that information back. And the data is voluntary. So there's a real disconnect in terms of how we collected data in those early days. As I mentioned, there's a big time lag between the demand and the supply. So early messaging around what is required will help immensely to help industry react to that demand. And as I've just mentioned, out of stock at a manufacturer doesn't necessarily mean it's out of stock with a patient. There is stock in many different places. It just means that manufacturer can't supply it. So I think that definition of exactly what out of stock is and what we're trying to do still needs to be worked upon between at a European and a national level, and making sure we're all using the right data, the right information, and indeed we need to agree on the harmonization of that data. There is this real disconnect around what you ask is what you get. So I think having a process that everybody understands this is the way we're going to collect data that is allowed to be able to aggregate it will help immensely. So that's certainly a big learning around collecting information in the next pandemic or whatever else it may be is going to be incredibly important to be able to indicate or signpost what we need for the future. We can go next slide, please. We did have some great examples, certainly for my own company, Accord Healthcare. We had, there was a critical facility that we had in India that was actually making intensive care products. And because of COVID, because of no airlines, because of no transportation, there was a great relationship with the Medicines Authority that agreed to do a virtual audit of that site. First time ever of a major audit. It was a desktop documentation evaluation, followed by an independent roving camera inspection of the facility. So they actually went around the facility as we were manufacturing, looking at the processes to allow us to be able to approve that facility. And I think that was a great opportunity where I think digitalization really breaks down that barriers of distance, time, and geography. So that was a great success, and certainly thank the authorities that helped us to get that facility up and running to allow us to provide those essential medicines. We did see regulatory flexibility across a number of things. Mainly was the movement of product across countries, even though they had, and this has been said a few times, even though that the packs had different country leaflets in them, patient information leaflets, in times of need, we were able to quickly move product around to different countries where the need was most. And that was incredibly helpful to have that flexibility to move products around. So quite clearly, electronic patient information leaflet will only enable that going forward and make life even easier. And certainly for some of the ICU medicines that we went through, where we needed to have variations approved very quickly, there was somebody at the end of the line that were able to accelerate that to really get that approval as fast as possible. And then in terms of reporting, I think we've already said it, it's reporting and transparency. We do need to move to a portal. The ISPOC, I understand, will be moving to a portal. We need to move away from the Excel sheet. And not just for the supply, but we need to understand that from the demand side as well. But glad to see that we are moving towards that way of a portal. We need to work more collaborative with the national competent authorities in terms of the demand. What does that actually look like? And then to use the EMA as the regulatory support where we have issues around moving products around, then that would be really helpful to accelerate that. So what are the big dreams versus basics? Certainly move away from Excel. We certainly need to have a much more integrated demand and supply data for all countries. I think we've already heard that today here. Certainly, even it's going to be big data. It's a huge volume of data. And I think using AI to fast detect trends in that data to look at peak demands will help us immensely. Try and use existing data sets. I think the work that people have done on the FMD data set, incredibly fantastic piece of work. Personally, I feel that FMD data could be used so much more to manage shortages and access to medicines. And I think it's a great repository that we could do more of and learn from it. That's been really, really helpful. And undoubtedly, only through collaboration and end-to-end transparency and trust, I think it will give us opportunities to make it better for all. That concludes it, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. And obviously, if you're in the audience and you would like to ask a brief question to Tony at the end, please put your questions in now via the Q&A button. So we're going to look a little bit more about the digital infrastructure angle and what's actually needed and why. And to talk us through that, I'm very pleased that we're joined by Caroline Kleinion, who is the Europe head of the Regulatory Competence Centre at Sandoz, and she's also the chair of the Regulatory and Scientific Committee for Medicines for Europe. So Caroline, if I could start by asking you, why is it that digitally integrated solutions are so important, and what are the building blocks?
Thank you for that question, Laura. I think, first of all, I'm very pleased to remind everybody that a lot of the previous speakers were already mentioning that regulatory efficiency, good data quality, and data interoperability of the systems across the different health authorities and also the industry are really key to get the basics right. And with the correct basics, you can take quick and correct decisions. You can get reliable insights about what's the current situation. And also very important, you can really speak the same language and use the same definition. To answer your question better, I think it is good to first look at what we are really doing today, because that might explain why these digital solutions are so desperately needed. So basically today, every time when a regulatory department in the industry wants to communicate to the regulators because they want to make a new product application, or if they want to make a change to an existing marketing authorization, they go into their document management system. They might also go into some of their existing databases, but in practice, they are basically collecting a package of digital paper, just very limitedly filled with data. And these packages, they are sending to, you might say, an electronic post office, which we call CESP. And then all the individual regulators in the countries, potentially this might be up to 28, go to that same post office where they are going to collect their, let's say their digital papers. They collect their papers there, they bring them to their own archives, own document management systems. They might fill with part of the data their own databases. But in the end, you're ending up with a document management system in the industry and a document management system with each of the regulators. And then when we start communicating with each other, we very often still use a tool like an email system. If you can move to the next slide, just to give a little bit more perspective even to this. Sorry, this was the next one, it doesn't matter. We made an estimation of how many of these packages are then arriving in this electronic post office on an annual basis, just by extrapolating what we are dispatching to this post office on an annual basis. And this must be easily over 150,000 of these packages. So you can imagine what a tremendous amount of, I would say, almost necessary work is being done there. Can you move to the next slide, please? So what we would really appreciate to have, as you can imagine, is a process where we are not sharing with everybody, let's say, electronic papers, but where we are sharing really as much as possible data. And these data should then go in the end in a database or a repository for that part that is still, let's say, electronic paper. And everybody should take the information from there. So there should be one single source of truth, no unclarity about definitions, no unclarity about what product we are referring to, but we would need a mechanism to get, let's say, the approved information there. So basically, we need an infrastructure. Some building blocks are already existing. Like mentioned before by Krista, there is already something like SPOR, which is a database where a lot of data could be collected, where a lot of data at least are enabled to be collected. But unfortunately, until now, we are lacking the right processes and the right structures and the right tools to set up that communication. And I think also partly we are lacking the funding. And of course, in the end, it's not just that there will be investment needed to be made on the side of the regulators, also on the side of the industry. This has to be done. But I'm sure that you can imagine, if you look at all these, at the volumes of data and information that we are sharing, it must be very beneficial to make sure that there is a proper system in place that could create big steps forwards when it comes to efficiency.
Thank you. Caroline, do digital regulatory systems have benefits other than for beyond business? I mean, does the wider stakeholder community benefit from it, or is it just making it more efficient for industry and therefore cutting costs?
I can understand your question. Of course, there is a big benefit by industry and regulators having this efficient system in place, because it's the basis for many decisions. But perhaps I can also share with you on the next slide a simple example which kind of reflects comments that were already given by many of the earlier speakers in relation to patient product information. So again, if you look at the system right now, if you have a patient information leaflet in your package of medicine or product, and if I, sitting in this industry, need to make a change to the information in that leaflet, that request for the change goes into the system that I described as the current system, with all the sending around of digital documents, people picking things up, storing it in their own archives, etc., and communication, very likely by email. Then there will come a moment in time when my request to make the change is approved by the regulators, and then there starts a very time-consuming process in addition, where first of all, I, as an industry, have to create my updated artwork. So there is an artwork creation process. When that process is finished, these new artworks have to go to the site where the next batches of the product are being packaged. Then when these next batches are packed, they need to go to the site where the product is released to the market. Then there comes a time when, after release to the market, it really ends up in the pharmacy. And only then, perhaps again after some time, it ends up really in the hands of the user. And all the time, the clock is ticking. So as you can imagine, there could also be, just in this simple example, there could be also huge benefits for patients. And this is not just when it comes to patient information. My colleague from industry, Ahmad, will later on go a little bit further into the details of this electronic patient information leaflet. If I can have the next slide, please. Obviously, other than just for this patient information leaflet, there are a lot of other benefits as well. I mean, first of all, many of the previous speakers have spoken about shortages. What has been encountered a lot is that since there is no common set of data where we all are agreeing that this is a single source of truth, there are really issues in reporting and mitigating the shortages. If you have the right digital system in place and the right communication routes and tools, we would all know what are the actual descriptions of a product. Are we really speaking about the same product? Can there not be a misunderstanding anymore? So that would really also improve the ways in which we can solve these potential shortages. It would for sure speed up decision-making processes, because a lot of those steps where we are exchanging documents are no longer needed. And again, we are all agreeing perhaps on a single source of truth. So there is no time lost discussing on what is really the situation there. You could gain very likely a very transparent view on the supply chains for the different products, and there could be an improved supply chain management. And then especially when it comes to crisis, etc., there could be much more tools available to the decision makers to coordinate on decisions related to public health. And of course, like mentioned before, there is really good support for successful implementation of EPI and also all kind of other e-health initiatives and cross-border services, data health initiative, where in the end, again, the basics are the things that really matter. So this is this single source of truth, the clear agreement on what is the right information at that point in time.
Thank you very much, Caroline. And I'm actually going to bring Ahmed, who you referred to, in right now, because to give a sort of complementary perspective from the industry. So Ahmed, if you're there, please do stick on your camera now, and because I've got a question for you about, well, I'd like you to tell us whether or not MSD's experience is similar to Caroline's at Sandoz, and also what you think needs to be done to sort of achieve the things that you're trying to in relation to the EPI in particular.
Sure thing. And good afternoon, everyone. So I hope you can hear me and see me well, Laura.
Perfectly.
Perfect. So again, thank you for the opportunity to take part of this in this panel, and perhaps a bit of an outlier in the Medicines for Europe conference, but I think it only demonstrates the need also to work across and within the industry together on these important topics. So it will be hard to top all the excellent points raised by our previous speakers, but I think listening carefully, I think the first thing that comes to mind and when listening to what has been mentioned, I think all coming for me to the conclusion that digital health itself, it's a reality and not a choice anymore. And I'm happy to see the discussions into direction of the how we're going to approach that. And I think you might appreciate that also within our parts of the pharmaceutical industry, we are actually also dealing with the observing the growth of data in the topic areas we just discussed, but also for us, like thinking about clinical trials, real-world evidence, and also the complexity there with the regulatory system and processes and the procedures, and like we've all seen also in the broader healthcare ecosystem. So with this growth of data and developments in digitalization overall, I think unavoidably what we're hearing in the conference so far, it brings with it an ever-increasing reliance on these digital infrastructures and integrated IT systems, and as mentioned again by others, are highly critical for a modern operation of the overall regulatory system. So because of this reliance, we don't have a choice anymore, right? So this is reality, and the question upon us how to jointly build the necessary capabilities to future-proof also the overall infrastructure in the next years and the next decades to come, and also how to optimize based on that the underlying processes, ways of working, and communication. So coming back to your initial question with this minor detour, yes, the examples raised by Caroline, music to my ears, and I would definitely also share those experiences and points raised by her. And these are just the tip of the iceberg. And if I would like to take another dimension in this, which I didn't really hear so far in the conference, it's also perhaps to discuss it also in the context of international cooperation, as we're all working also in a global context from the pharmaceutical perspective, and looking at those areas, defining the interoperable standards we mentioned, the data sharing, and how we move forward. And I think the COVID-19 has been an excellent example of that. And also the paradigm shift, moving from document-based to more data structured-based regulatory system processes is essential in that sense. So I think all the underlying values and principles we've just discussed, it's all about the communication. So timely implementation of this decision-making when talking about regulatory procedure, but also the actual communication about the product information that we hear numerous times on electronic product information, but also in view of the transparency around shortages and optimizing the supply chains to benefit patients. I think if I remember correctly, how to achieve that was your second part. I think before we answer that question, I think it's important first to acknowledge that we all have to deal with finite resources. So the scarcity of resources across systems and stakeholders is something we must take into account. And because of this, I think it's utmost important for all stakeholders to implement these actions, to leverage synergies we discussed, to minimize regulatory redundancy. And also coming back to the main theme of the webinar, it will be important that actions undertaken, whether it's through the network strategy, the pharmaceutical strategies, and all the other adjacent documents, to be very complementary to each other, also with the other initiatives we see in EU and on national. And again, particularly the electronic products information is a topic close to my heart. And here, in a few years ago, between Medicines for Europe, FPA, and our colleagues from AHDP, we early on defined the need and the shared ambitions we have in developing this topic further, and also to drive a cross-industrial vision on this particular opportunity. And I think as we are faced across the various parts of the pharmaceutical industry with the same issues and challenges as also outlined by Caroline, So especially in that electronic product information space, moving again from document-based to structured data, and how we reach that, how do we reach patients and healthcare professionals? I think the example that we have set up here to work across industry, to set up a cross-industrial inter-association task force, it really also helps us to engage in the dialogues amongst each other, to define what we need and how to do it, but also to have an effective dialogue also with the regulators, with the EMA, the HMA groups mentioned earlier by the European Commission, but also other relevant stakeholders to define a proper roadmap, how we want to move forward in that. So just to finish off, I know we're pressed on time, Laura, so I wanted to keep it short. So these can all be very theoretical discussions around digital transformation and can be very abstract. But I think Krista really made a very, very good point. When we define these kind of projects, really think about defining a roadmap of implementation, think about the impact assessment and the financing and funding of these, just to make sure we can make use of all the opportunities and have that cross stakeholders dialogue on these particular topics.
Thank you very much. Can you give us very briefly, if you could, just a couple of examples of where the digital transformation in the regulatory system actually does benefit healthcare stakeholders?
Well, I think we've heard the electronic product information example. So just to finish off on that, I think that's perhaps the most tangible topic we have discussed so far. If you look at there, you will see it can benefit different stakeholders across industry, health authorities, like we said, about efficiency gains, perhaps also help in the mitigation of shortages to allow for flexible supply chains, patients, healthcare professionals, which improve access, but also the ability to advance health literacy. I think it's an important topic not mentioned here, but also the digital health literacy. There's so much you can do on paper versus the ability to access information in a digital way, but also to be able to provide more context and information on the product. And I think the last point I want to end maybe on this question is the discussion we had about removing the paper. It's really important theme, not only from a practical perspective, but also from an environmental perspective. And I think we have very good projects ongoing currently also in Europe. When you look at Belgium, Luxembourg, when they're already trying to pilot removing paper from hospital products and really having very good outcomes of that, in that it's really not impacting practical situations in a hospital setting. So really, I think working on these cases, trying to think through the impact assessment it has on the wide variety of stakeholders, I think really drives, underpinning the importance and how we drive forward digital transformation in Europe in the next decade.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we now have time for a couple, just very brief questions for the wider panel and for the audience. So Sarah, I've got one question that's come in for you, if you would stick on your camera and your microphone, if that's okay. Very briefly, if you wouldn't mind answering this question, how will the EMA have an enhanced role following implementation of the EU Pharmaceutical Strategy? So Sarah, if you could take that one, but keep it short if you can with your answer. How will the EMA have an enhanced role following implementation of the Pharmaceutical Strategy?
Thank you for, can you hear? Wait.
Yes, very well, thanks.
Video is not on, yes?
Your camera's not on, but we can hear you. So, and given that we're tight for time, just keep talking.
I have clicked on the video, it's not functioning, my apologies. That is a very good question, and I have to mention that it's our commissioner, our president, mentioned this in her State of the Union speech. I mean, everything that was done in the fight against COVID, particularly in the early days where there was so much uncertainty and the need for response that was under this emergency, we realized that we needed to do so many things that were not contemplated in the treaties. So we find ourselves in a situation where there is no health union because this was not contemplated before. And in that context, the capacity for, we need to have agencies like EMA and ECDC that are able to respond to this crisis. So, and there we understood what were the bottlenecks that we had to overcome, and particularly regarding the European Medicines Agency and the reinforcement of the mandate of the EMA is really about, you know, having increased capacity for monitoring and mitigating shortages, something we spoke about already today.
And is it going to get more of an assertive role? Sorry, I'm just very mindful of time. So is it going to get a sort of more power?
Yes, and capacity. I mean, all this digital transformation to really improve our work on shortages requires that capacity also at the EMA level.
Okay.
So yeah, and there are other elements that are online. So.
No, that's perfect. That's great. Thank you very much. Sorry to rush you there, just because I want to get through a quick question. Caroline, one that's come in for you, if you could answer this one very briefly. What's the first practical step to making the regulatory system interoperable? So if you could give us a short answer to that, what you think the first step is, Caroline.
Yes, I think the first step is really to have a clear roadmap, honestly, because we will need to make investments also from the side of industry. Okay. So we need to have a kind of a guarantee, a timeline when it is really going to work. I think we are really motivated to do this, but again, we need that decision.
Okay, so we need a roadmap before we can do anything else. Thank you. And then finally, quick question for Marcus, if we can. Marcus, somebody asks, what timeframe can we expect to achieve the establishment of the digital infrastructure in the regulatory system? Can it be achieved now by 2022 or longer term? And who should take the lead? I appreciate that's 5 questions in one, but if you could keep it brief, that would be even better. Thank you.
Yeah. I think it's exactly as I said in the beginning. I think it's a partnership between different stakeholders which have to, you know, to immediately engage and take their hand. I don't think that the infrastructure can be built in a day, meaning this year. But I don't have a definite timeline. But for me, what's important is to underline is that it needs a partnership. It needs working together, and it needs, you know, especially now because the funding is available through EO for it. So I think this is now really EO for Health. I think this is really now a great step forward, and hopefully we can do this quickly.
Okay, thank you. And then Tony, I have one very quick question for you. Do you see a benefit of the ISPOC reporting? Is it not creating only extra work for the industry?
Right now, I would say yes, it is creating extra. I think we're still learning together, and I think that's the important thing. You know, what are we trying to create? Why are we trying to create it? How are we going to use it? So right now, it's too early to say on that road path. One good thing that's come out of it, I would say, is that when there has been an issue, then the EMA have been on the phone to me almost immediately to say, how can they help? So that's actually a positive. So giving them visibility to be able to help really makes a difference, but more to come.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I think that actually brings us broadly to the end of the session now. I'd like to thank all of our speakers very much for your great interventions, great questions from the audience. Apologies that we couldn't get through more of them. It was just such a packed schedule. But thank you very much to everybody for sort of asking them, and also to the speakers for taking them as and when they arose during the session. Thank you all for coming. I just would like to run through the conclusions that sort of the conversation that's come out today. So some of the things that we've pulled out from today's session are that effective frameworks and financial investments are going to be key to the success of the digital transformation. That there has to be digital regulatory structure and data strategies across the whole of the member state in order to avoid two-speed Europe. Digital regulatory system needs to be the backbone for other connected systems. COVID has shown that there's a need to coordinate information sharing to ensure equitable distribution of medicines to patients and to avoid shortages. And then finally, digital regulatory systems have broader benefits, not just for the industry, but also for patients who can access information in real time about medication. And also, obviously, treatment can be managed online much more faster and more efficiently by doctors and pharmacists. So once again, thanks to everybody for taking part, for watching. You can see the link again. This webinar has been recorded, so we will be sending the link out and you can watch it again and share it with colleagues. In the meantime, thanks all very much and good.